In a regular Japanese high school, the students are all admiring their student council president Suzuna Nukami and her right-hand man, Vice President Kazuki Ryusu. They are noble, beloved by everyone and always the center of attention. On the other end of the spectrum, there's Ken Usato. He's the complete opposite of those two glamorous people, being completely forgettable. Nothing interesting ever happens to him, but he secretly hopes for an extraordinary and fantastical life. One rainy day, as he's leaving school, Ken realizes his umbrella is missing. Having no other choice, he decides to wait inside for the rain to stop. A little while later, Suzune comes across him in the hallway. Finding out he doesn't have an umbrella, she tells him she can't let him go home in the rain. Just then, Kazuki appears and offers to lend Ken his spare umbrella. Ken is surprised that Kazuki knows his name and accepts the umbrella with a smile on his face. The three decide to go home together, and Ken realizes that the two most popular students at school are actually nicer than he thought. Since everyone at school is gossiping about Suzune and Kazuki dating, Ken asks them about it. It turns out the two aren't dating after all, but Suzune is pleased because Ken asked them directly instead of whispering behind their backs. Suzune then asks Ken what he wants to do after high school. He answers that he still doesn't know, and he's surprised when the successful student council president tells him she feels the same. She's confident that she can achieve anything if she puts her mind to it, but sometimes feels like she doesn't belong in this world. Thinking about it, Ken realizes he feels the same. Suddenly, Kazuki and Suzune stop in their tracks and ask Ken if he can hear bells ringing. He's confused, unable to hear anything. At that moment, a magic circle appears beneath their feet, and Ken immediately thinks it must be a gate to another world. Hearing that, Kazuki gets confused, but Suzune gets excited about being transported into a fantasy world. Having lost consciousness, they wake up in a luxurious palace in front of a king, his guards, and a nun. King Lloyd is the man's name, and he rules over a kingdom called Linger. He has summoned Ken and his new friends so they can serve him as heroes. 2 years prior, the kingdom had been invaded by the Demon Lord's army. Back then, the king's forces barely managed to fight them off, but now the demons are preparing to attack again. Out of desperation, the king has now summoned promising individuals from another world using forbidden magic. Ken is surprised at how hyped Suzune is about the whole situation. But Kazuki is angry and confused, demanding the king to bring them back to their own world. However, the hero summoning spell only works in one direction, so there's nothing that can be done right now. Kneeling before the newcomers, the king promises them he'll find a way to send them back home once the Demon Lord's army is defeated. It turns out that Suzune and Kazuki have specifically been chosen by the hero summoning spell, which is why they heard the bells earlier. Ken couldn't hear the bells at all, though, which must mean he was accidentally transported with them. Lucky for Ken, there's a chance that he might be able to be useful too, and he's treated no differently than Suzune and Kazuki. Then, a nun called Welsie presents the three otherworlders with a crystal ball which she's going to use to measure their magical abilities. First in line, Suzune touches the crystal ball and it becomes golden, indicating that she has an affinity for thunder magic and a large amount of mana too. Next up is Kazuki, who turns out to be good at light magic, which is rare. Suzune is getting excited about all this, shattering Ken's image of her as a proper and serious class president. Then, Ken touches the crystal ball, wondering if he has any magic power at all. To his delight, the ball turns emerald green, but Welsie is nervous for some reason. Suddenly, she grabs Ken and runs off with him. The nun presents Ken to the king, exclaiming that he has an extraordinarily rare type of magic. Finding out that the crystal ball glowed green, the king gets terrified and orders Ken to be taken away from the castle as soon as possible. Suddenly, a scary-looking woman storms into the throne room. She wants to know about the heroes, but the king convinces her that Ken is just an ordinary kid. Before the woman goes off to see Suzune and Kazuki, she introduces herself to Ken as Rose, the captain of the kingdom's rescue team. Just before she leaves the room, Ken asks the king to explain why the crystal ball glowed green when he touched it. Hearing that, Rose orders Ken to come with her, but the king won't have it. Welsie creates a magic bubble around Ken and sends him off somewhere, but Rose runs after him at an inhuman speed. She breaks the protective bubble mid-air, grabbing Ken before he crashes onto the ground, basically kidnapping Ken. Rose announces that she's going to turn him into a powerful healing magic user and recruit him into her rescue team. The king feels sorry for him because he wasn't even supposed to come to this world in the first place, and now he's getting involved with such a dangerous woman. Taking Ken to the rescue team's headquarters outside of town, Rose explains that he has the affinity to become a healing magic user. From that day on, he's going to live there together with the rest of the team. Unfortunately, the team members seem like terrifying thugs, since healing magic users are so rare. Only Rose and 2 other people on the rescue team can use it. Tomorrow, she is going to start teaching Ken healing magic, and his whole body is telling him he should run away. He ends up sharing a room with a guy called Tong and falls asleep wondering what the next day is going to be like. The following morning, Ken wakes up to Suzuna and Kazuki visiting him. The two are worried about him, but Ken reassures them that he'll be fine. Inspired by Ken's positivity, Kazuki decides he'll do his best too, even though he's not enjoying their situation as much as Suzuna. After they leave, Rose appears and gives Ken a journal where he can write down his training regimen and such. After breakfast, Ken's training starts off unexpectedly relaxed. Rose teaches him to get a feel for the mana in his body. Next, she tells him to try reading a book, and he finds out that he can read the strange language of this world. It turns out that summoned heroes from another world automatically have translation magic cast on them. The book contains basic information about the kingdom of Linger and its inhabitants. Reading the book calmly, Ken feels like his training won't be so bad. The following day, Ken is forced to run as much as he can. The day after that, he's forced to run until his muscles are so sore he can barely move. Rose watches him the entire time, taunting and insulting him. Ken is scared to talk back, so he decides to write badly about her in his journal. On the fourth day, Ken starts training with the other members of the team, who are all much faster than he is. The fifth day passes much like the previous ones, but on the sixth, there's progress. When he's at his most exhausted, Ken unconsciously releases some healing magic from his hand. The next day, the running continues, but Rose gets mad for no apparent reason and starts beating Ken up. The beatings continue for the next 2 days, until Ken realizes he can willingly use his magic to heal himself from Rose's attacks. On the 10th day, Ken gets much better at running, since he can now heal himself whenever he gets tired. He starts doubting the effectiveness of his training, but he doesn't dare complain to Rose about it. From the 11th day on, Ken now has to do 1,000 push-ups in addition to running. While he's working out, Rose explains that his training is so harsh because he needs to be able to run away from his enemies. Since he's going to be a healer, he has to reach his injured allies as fast as possible. Just when he was starting to get used to his training regimen, Rose made Ken wear a weighted vest from the 13th day on. On the 14th day, Ken finds that Tong ate his lunch. Furious, he starts chasing Tong around, not even noticing the weighted vest anymore. Ken starts thinking that Rose is playing tricks on him. A week later, Ken is visited by Kazuki and Suzuna. The two arrive while he's doing push-ups with a huge weight on his back and Rose sitting on top of it. They can't believe what they're seeing, and Rose even adds another massive weight on top. Kazuki and Suzuna arrive together with a knight called Siglis and the kingdom's princess called Celia. Seeing the torturous training Rose is inflicting on Ken, Siglis gets angry at her and grabs her by the collar, but she isn't intimidated at all. To Ken's horror, Rose announces that she wants to make him her right-hand man. She's impressed by how he's been able to survive her training and how he can't stand losing. Rose sends Ken off to have lunch with his friends and Celia, while Siglis stays with her to reprimand her. It turns out that Siglis is the strongest knight in the kingdom and also the commander of the army. He's teaching Suzuna and Kazuki sword fighting. When Ken realizes that Celia is the princess, he gets nervous, but she tells him it's fine to act casually around her. As the atmosphere turns more relaxed, they enjoy the pie Celia brought. Even though Kazuki and Suzuna's training is pretty harsh, Siglis and Welsi always put their well-being first. As opposed to them, Rose doesn't seem to care about Ken's health at all. Suddenly, Suzuna lifts Ken's shirt to reveal how muscular he got. It turns out that she's actually crazy about muscles, and Celia gets embarrassed. Changing the topic, Kazuki asks Ken if training with Rose is tough for him. Ken tells him it's really hard, but he's starting to have fun in his new life with the rescue team. He wants to be able to do as much as he can to help Kazuki and Suzuna when they go out into the battlefield. Then, Tong comes by to bring Ken some lunch, but Ken never forgot about the day he stole his lunch. Getting angry at each other, the two start beating each other up in front of Celia and Ken's friends. Looking at that scene, Kazuki and Suzuna realize that Ken might have gotten used to his new life quicker than they did. Suzuna believes there's a reason the three were summoned together, and she believes in Ken. That night, Ken realizes that he gained muscle mass unusually quickly because he has been constantly tearing and healing his muscle. However, he's still not sure if he's mentally strong enough to fight. The next day, Rose announces to Ken that they're going out. She takes him out of the castle walls and shows him to a huge forest known as the Darkness of Linger. It's a forest full of monsters, and Rose orders Ken not to come back until he has hunted down a grand grizzly. Ken is shocked, having read that blue grizzlies are already very dangerous, but grand grizzlies are even more dangerous versions of them. Still, Rose is confident that he should be able to take a grand grizzly down easily. Getting fed up with Ken's complaining, Rose simply grabs him and mercilessly throws him into the forest. Using his healing magic, Ken just barely manages to land on the ground in one piece. As soon as he does, a giant grand grizzly ambushes him. Locked in a frantic chase, Ken realizes the grizzly can't be worse than Rose and decides to meet it head-on. However, the monster is joined by 2 more blue grizzlies, and Ken decides to keep running after all. While sprinting, he hears a waterfall and jumps into a river as soon as he sees it. At sundown, the exhausted Ken is disappointed by the rock-hard rations Rose gave him to eat. Still, he remains positive. The following morning, Ken ventures out deep into the forest, marking trees along his way. After a while, he notices scratch marks on one of the trees. At that moment, he hears a rustling in the bushes and gets ready to fight. Surprisingly, a small wounded rabbit monster emerges. Feeling sorry for him, Ken kindly heals him using his magic. Grateful, the rabbit starts following him around. When Ken notices that the rabbit can understand him, he asks him where to find a grand grizzly. Following the rabbit, Ken soon finds the 3 grizzlies he encountered before. He decides to bide his time and observe the bears while they're sleeping. When his canteen runs dry the next day, Ken warily fills it with water from the river. Just as he'd feared, his stomach starts hurting violently a day after drinking it. Not even healing magic makes it better right away since he was basically poisoned by the dirty water. Having noticed his friend is in trouble, the rabbit shows Ken to a source of clean, drinkable water the next day. Suddenly, the rabbit starts acting strangely and climbs up a tree, obviously terrified of something. Ken decides to hide together with him and soon sees a gigantic snake slithering about. 4 days later, Ken keeps observing the grizzlies, uneasy because he doesn't know where the snake is. The next day, he decides to finally defeat the grand grizzly. Rain starts falling and the rabbit is acting strangely again. Deciding to heed the creature's warning, Ken waits for the rain to stop. Determined to fulfill his mission, Ken heads for the grizzly's cave after a while, even though the rabbit still seems worried about him. To Ken's surprise, he finds the grand grizzly and the bigger of the 2 blue grizzlies savagely butchered. Looking at the bite marks on their bodies, he realizes the giant snake he saw a while back must have killed them for fun. Then, the little blue grizzly appears. When he realizes his family is dead, he lets out a cry of anguish. Feeling sorry for the grizzly, Ken decides to get revenge for him. Back at the rescue team's headquarters, Kazuki is worried about Ken when he finds out where he is, but Suzuna is confident that Ken is going to make it out alive. In the forest, Ken prepares for battle against the giant snake and crafts a wooden spear. After he's done, the rabbit reluctantly takes him to the massive monster. When they find it, Ken is surprised to see the little blue grizzly desperately fighting the snake. At first, Ken gets scared, but then decides that there can't be anything scarier than Rose and charges at the serpent. Dodging the monster's attacks, Ken manages to put out its eye with his spear. When the snake finally manages to hit him, Ken realizes its attacks don't damage him much since he can quickly heal himself. However, he gets too confident. When the snake manages to bite into his arm, it's incredibly painful. Luckily, that's the arm he's holding his spear in, so he stabs the snake and it lets him go. As soon as he frees himself, Ken gets an unpleasant surprise. The snake's bite turns out to be venomous and he starts feeling weak. However, he learned how to heal himself from the inside out, so now he can recover from being poisoned too. Courageously, Ken charges at the snake once again. The snake's massive tail prepares to hit him, but the blue grizzly appears and holds it back. At that moment, Ken climbs on top of the monster and punches it in the head with incredible force. Then, he jabs his wooden spear deep into its skull, making it crash to the ground. Exhausted but feeling accomplished, Ken lies on the ground and he's happy to find out that the blue grizzly considers him his friend. Suddenly, the monster serpent gets up once again. Having basically depleted all of his mana, Ken realizes he's going to die and starts cursing Rose loudly. At that moment, Rose appears from nowhere and defeats the snake with a single strike. She reveals that the rabbit monster's name is Kukuru and he's actually her pet. She asked him to watch over Ken during his challenge. It turns out that she was near Ken at all times, even though she planned to intervene as little as possible. However, she didn't expect the snake to appear, which is actually a monster created by the Demon Lord's army. Since the real goal of Ken's training was gaining experience fighting something much stronger than him, he actually passed Rose's test. She didn't expect him to be able to take on a grand grizzly, but the demon army's snake monster is even stronger than that. Since the blue grizzly and Ken became friends, Rose orders it to help carry him back to the rescue team headquarters. On their way back, Rose threatens to punish Ken for screaming insults about her when the snake was about to kill him. At the end of the day, Rose tells Ken he's got what it takes to join her on the battlefield. He has the ability to withstand pain, the physical aptitude required to fight, and even a strong mental state. The other 2 healers on the rescue team aren't as mentally strong as he is. With a somber expression, Rose also reveals that the Demon Lord's army is supposed to attack soon. Even more shockingly, she tells Ken he's going to join her on the front lines. Ken is unsure if he's capable of doing that, but Rose believes he'll be ready if he trains hard until that time comes. Meanwhile, in the Demon Kingdom, the Demon Lord's army has finished making preparations to invade the Linger Kingdom, just as Rose predicted. The Demon Lord himself tells his commander Amila that she'll be the one leading the troops. After the meeting, Amila comes across a glasses-wearing demon called Hyreluk who teases her about how nervous she was talking to the Demon Lord. Hyreluk, known as the Demon Doctor, is the one responsible for making monsters for the army. Leading Amila to his lab, he shows her an even more powerful version of the snake Ken fought, which he calls Baljanak. Thinking about the Linger Kingdom's army, Amila concludes that Siglis isn't the enemy she's most worried about. Even more troublesome than him are the rescue team members, because they can quickly heal their wounded allies. It also turns out that Rose has a deep personal grudge against the Demon Lord, so Amila wants to get rid of her. She thinks that a powerful mage called the Black Knight is capable of doing the job. Back at the rescue team's headquarters in the Linger Kingdom, Ken wakes up, appreciating that he can finally sleep in a bed again. He gets up and feeds some fruit to his new grizzly pet, whom he decides to call Blurrin. In order to make Blurrin useful, Rose makes Ken run with him on his back and pretend the bear is a wounded soldier. To make the training even harder, Rose has the other rescue team members chase after him and attack him, just as enemies on a battlefield would, after running for hours upon hours while being attacked with stink bombs, falling logs and various other traps. Ken finally collapses on the ground. His stamina was lower than usual. Rose teaches him that people get tired quicker when they're dealing with stress and nervousness, which he was exposed to due to the traps. After a break, Rose makes Ken run around the castle town with Blurrin still on his back. The citizens are alarmed since Blurrin is a monster after all, but relax once they realize that Ken is part of the rescue team. Apparently, the weird members of the rescue team run around town all the time, so the townspeople aren't surprised by them no matter what strange antics they're up to. Once Ken gets closer to the royal castle, he decides to pay Suzuna and Kazuki a visit. While he's distracted by that thought, a blonde guy calls out to him and runs after him when he doesn't react. Ken doesn't notice him at all until he falls down from exhaustion. After Ken heals him, the man introduces himself as Orga Flor, one of the rescue team's 2 healers. He admits that he and his younger sister, the second healer, could never keep up with Rose's brutal training. Instead, the two run a clinic in the city and use their healing magic to help the citizens. Even though he's good at healing others, Orga isn't very good at healing himself. Curious and worried about the impending war, Ken asks Orga what's it like being on a real battlefield. Orga explains that Tong and the other rescue team members who can't use healing magic bring the injured soldiers to the rear where he and his sister heal them. However, Ken is worried because Rose told him he'll be on the front lines instead. Orga is surprised, but reassures him, telling him that Rose wouldn't choose someone to be her right-hand man if she didn't believe in him. Before the two part ways, Orga asks Ken not to hate Rose too much. Even though she's rough around the edges, she's actually just awkward with people. Ken tells him that he never really hated her, though. When he reaches the castle, Ken looks for his friends. Suzuna is happy to see him and takes a break from her training. Seeing Blurrin, she thinks he's adorable and wants to touch him, but the bear won't let her. Noticing the calluses on Suzuna's hand, Ken heals her, making her blush. Ken wanted to see Kazuki too, but he went out with Siglis to gain experience fighting monsters. Waving goodbye to Suzuna, Ken continues running around the castle town. Impressed by how hard his friends are working, he gets even more determined to become useful in the war. Back in his world, Ken always admired what other people could do and he couldn't, but now he can finally do something too. After his training, Ken talks to Rose at the rescue team's headquarters. He admits that he doesn't think he can fight or kill anyone, but he'll definitely save his friends and anyone else who needs him. Impressed by his resolve, Rose praises him, making him feel like he is a true member of the rescue team. The next morning, Rose tells Ken that the king ordered him to accompany Suzuna on her training. Apparently, he was supposed to help Kazuki with his training too, but Rose thought he was too exhausted from fighting the snake in the forest back then, so she refused. When Ken meets up with Suzuna, she's ecstatic about him joining her. She introduces Ken to Eriku the knight and Korin the mage, who are also going to join them. Before they leave, Rose warns Suzuna not to rely on Ken too much since his healing magic isn't all powerful. Meanwhile, Kazuki continues his training at the castle. Suddenly, Princess Celia interrupts him, mad at him because he won't take a break even after his grueling training with Siglis the day before. She seems to care about him a lot, thinking about Blurrin's family getting slaughtered in the forest. Ken is worried if the bear is going to be fine returning there for Suzuna's training. His musings are interrupted by Suzuna, who wants to cuddle with Blurrin while he's asleep. Ken won't let her do it, but she doesn't listen to him and the situation ends with her getting crushed by a drowsy Blurrin. Suddenly, Korin the mage detects a group of bandits preparing an ambush. The ruffians come out and order the party to hand over belongings, but neither Ken nor Suzuna are actually scared. When one of them notices Blurrin and says they should catch him and turn him into a pelt, Suzuna gets mad and fries him using her lightning magic. A fight starts with the bandits clearly losing, but then Korin detects something else and a horde of frenzied boar monsters runs toward them. The party is startled, but everyone does their best to fight. Suddenly, one of the boars runs into Ken and Suzuna, knocking them into the air. Luckily, Ken manages to use his healing magic to soften their fall. The two of them end up washing up on the same shore Ken found himself when he came to the forest for the first time. Now they're stranded in the middle of nowhere with no food at all. Being an experienced survivalist, Ken decides they should spend the night in a cave. For dinner, Suzuna catches some fish using her thunder magic and then uses it to light a fire too, while Ken's drying off his clothes. Suzuna can't help but stare at his muscles. Suddenly, they notice something is watching them, but it just turns out to be a bunch of monkeys. They seem cute, but Ken warns Suzuna that they're poisonous. She doesn't listen to him and touches one of them, getting poisoned instantly. Back in the royal castle, the king tells Kazuki that his friends went missing in the forest. The mage Korin managed to send a message to him, but she doesn't know where Suzuna and Ken are. Hearing this, Kazuki immediately wants to go looking for them, but Rose stops him, telling him she's certain that Ken is more than capable of protecting Suzuna and himself. In the forest, Ken and Suzuna enjoy their fried fish, since they're going to take turns sleeping to keep watch. Suzuna insists Ken should go to sleep first because he spent a lot of mana on healing magic. In the middle of the night, Suzuna admits to Ken that she doesn't want to go back to their original world. She used to feel empty there and she isn't attached to her home, friends, or family. In this fantasy world, she feels like she's free for the first time in her life. Ken feels like he's similar to her. He always wanted to change his boring self and now he finally feels like he's doing it. When he first arrived, he focused on not getting in Suzuna and Kazuki's way, but now that he's part of the rescue team, he has resolved to protect his friends and the kingdom of Linger. Suzuna agrees with him, saying she wants to protect the kingdom as its hero. That night, the two grow closer. The next morning, Ken and Suzuna prepare themselves and venture out into the forest. Suddenly, they hear something in the bushes and ready their weapons. Luckily, it turns out it's only Blurrin and Eriku the warrior. Blurrin seems to have picked up Ken's scent and led Eriku to him. Picking up another scent, Blurrin goes off somewhere. Following him, Ken finds that he returned to the place where Blurrin's family died. However, the grizzly doesn't get depressed, instead confirming that he wants to stay by Ken's side. After a while, Ken, Suzuna and the rest of their party happily return to the royal palace. The king decides to postpone Suzuna's training and tells her she can take some time to rest up. A worried Kazuki, followed by Celia, runs towards Suzuna and Ken in the hallway. He's relieved that his friends are fine. When Kazuki is left alone with Celia, she notices how much he loves his friends and wonders if there's room for her in his life too. Seeing how much she cares about him, Kazuki agrees to start calling Celia by her first name and she's happy. In the throne room, the king notifies Siglis and Rose about strange happenings in the forest. The weaker monsters there seem to be running away as fast as they can, terrified of something. This could be because of the Demon Lord's army approaching. Since Rose is the fastest in the kingdom, the king gives her a special mission to go and confirm the location of the Demon Lord's army. She accepts, but doesn't accept his other request to go back to being a commander like she used to in the first war against the demon. Rose still blames herself for letting her soldiers die in that war, and the scar on her right eye will always remind her of that. The king doesn't consider that to be her fault, but she thinks she was overly confident back then. After the war, Rose formed the rescue team because she wanted to save people instead of fighting. Her final goal is training a subordinate who will never die. She thinks Ken has the potential to become that subordinate. He even reminds her of someone who died in her arms in the war. At night, Ken gets an envelope from Rose with a letter inside. There's a message for him ordering him to deliver the letter the following day. Somewhere else, Amila of the Demon Lord's army is ordering her men to build a bridge in preparation for their invasion of the Linger Kingdom. Most of her subordinates are listening to her, but the Black Knight acts cocky and disrespectful towards her. Suddenly, the demon soldiers are attacked by someone from the shadows. The person throws a huge log at them and smashes the bridge. Amila recognizes the person as Rose, but she runs away with a grin before she can follow. The next day, Ken heads into the castle town to deliver the letter. Unknown to him, a blonde girl is watching him. Arriving at his destination, Ken finds out that the letter is addressed to the Fleur Clinic, where he meets Yuru, Orga's sister. The girl takes Ken to Orga, who's treating a patient. Looking at Orga's healing magic, Ken notices that its color is much richer than the color of his magic. Opening Rose's letter, Orga gets a worried look on his face, but doesn't tell Ken or Yuru anything. Yuru recalls how Rose tried training her and Orga, but it was no use. The training was just too brutal for them. Back then, Rose seemed obsessed and frustrated to her, but now she seems much happier. Suddenly, a man enters the clinic and calls for Orga's help. Several people fell off a roof in town, so Orga asks Yuru and Ken to help him treat them. They soon arrive at the scene and the healer siblings start helping the injured people, but Ken is insecure because he never healed anyone with injuries as bad as this. Noticing his nervousness, Orga calms him down and tells him he just has to believe he can heal the wound. With that in mind, Ken manages to successfully heal the unfortunate man. After that ordeal, he promises the siblings he'll visit them again and leaves. When they're left alone, Orga reveals to Yuru that the letter he received said the war against the demons is going to break out soon. On his way back home, Ken is stopped by a fox-eared girl. Mysteriously, she tells him that he's the only one who can change the future. When he looks her in the eye, Ken sees visions of an awful war and all his friends dying at the hands of the Black Knight. The girl then runs away, leaving him shocked. Confused, Ken continues looking for the girl until Rose runs into him. She tells him about the situation with the demons, and Ken asks her if she knows about a fox-eared girl in town. Rose tells him that a mysterious fox-eared girl showed up in the kingdom 2 years ago. She was all alone, even though she was just a child. Furthermore, it's strange that she managed to reach the castle town unharmed because beastkin like her are valuable prey. There are very rare beastkin who are called oracles of time and who have prophetic visions. Parting ways with Ken, Rose reports to the king. Even though she destroyed the demon army's bridge, she expects them to rebuild it in a couple of days. Later, the king invites Suzuna and Kazuki for an audience with him, and they can already predict that a war with the demons is imminent. That night, Ken is haunted by the visions the fox girl showed him and can't sleep. Suddenly, he's startled to see strange lights appearing in his window. It turns out that's just Kazuki using his light magic to call out to him. Outside, Kazuki admits to Ken that he's afraid of going to war. He managed to pass his training in the forest, but he was still terrified of the monsters he had to fight. He's conflicted because the people of the Linger Kingdom expect great things from him, but he doesn't think he can fight in the war. Having listened to his problems, Ken tells him it's fine to be scared and to put his own feelings first sometimes. He admits that he's afraid too, but he's determined to go to war because he wants to save all those people who were kind to him and supported him. Hearing that, Kazuki slaps himself and realizes he wants to protect his friends and the people of the kingdom too. He decides to face his fears head-on, which he realizes is going to be easier because he has Ken and Suzuna by his side. After Kazuki leaves, Suzuna shows herself. She was worried about Kazuki, so she followed him. The next day, the king officially announces that the Demon Lord's army has breached the kingdom's border. Delivering a rousing speech, he convinces the people of his kingdom that they're going to emerge victorious thanks to the rescue team and the summoned heroes. Before he leaves for the battlefield, Kazuki stops by Celia's room. The princess wishes him the best of luck, and Kazuki promises to return alive and well. Meanwhile, Orga and Yuru arrive at the rescue team's headquarters. Yuru meets Blurrin and wants to pet him, but he keeps swatting her hand away. While those two are struggling, Orga tells Ken that this is going to be Yuru's first real battle. Then, Rose calls for Ken to meet her in her room. She advises him to think before he heals someone on the battlefield. He should prioritize the heavily wounded soldiers and ignore the ones who don't need his help that much. Rose then gives Ken the official rescue team's uniform, which touches him deeply. Finally, Rose grabs Ken's face and tells him that the most important thing on the battlefield is being careful and looking out for himself. Confidently, Ken assures her that he'll protect both him and his allies. The next morning, the Linger Kingdom's army together with the rescue team departs toward the Demon Lord's army. On the way there, Rose teaches Ken about the demons. Demons are demihumans with twisted horns on their heads. They're physically stronger and have more mana than humans, making even their regular soldiers very dangerous. Now we go back 5 years to the time when Rose was the battalion commander of the Linger Knights. Since demons had been sighted around the kingdom, the king decided to assign guards to merchants passing through potentially dangerous areas. Siglis suspected that the demons were preparing to invade, but Rose didn't take that possibility seriously. While Siglis prepared his troops for a potential invasion, Rose didn't do anything. Back then, Rose's deputy commander was a night girl called All. Even back then, Rose was violent and everyone in the battalion would blame All for getting her mad. A week later, the king's men noticed that highly trained demon soldiers are attacking monsters in Linger territory, so Rose's battalion is sent to investigate. That night, Rose briefs her soldiers on their mission. Even though Kukuru can sense monsters, she decides to leave him at home because she doesn't want to expose him to danger. Since Rose is going with them, her battalion is confident that the mission will go well. The next morning, Rose's battalion ventures into the darkness of Linger to look for the demons. The day passes without them finding anything. However, All has a feeling that the demons are on the west side of the forest and suggests they go look for them there the following day. While the others are sleeping, Rose watches the fire. She notices that All can't sleep and asks her if something's troubling her. All doesn't understand why Rose chose her to be her deputy commander since she doesn't think there's anything special about her. The deputy's job is pretty much just doing errands, but Rose thinks All has been doing them well. She even thinks that one day she'll promote her to commander, but All protests. Before she met Rose, All used to refuse following orders she didn't agree with, and she was known as a knight nobody could control. When she became part of Rose's battalion, All continued ignoring orders she didn't like, but the strong Rose would always punish her if she wasn't obedient. Because she grew frustrated with Rose, All decided to get back at her by doing all she could to endure her harsh training. With time, All started respecting Rose, especially since she was the only one who hadn't given up on her. Everyone in the battalion thinks that Rose is the only one who understands them, so all thinks that nobody could replace her as the commander. Flicking All's forehead, Rose tells her that precisely because she understands her, she knows that she would be a good commander. She chose her as her deputy commander because she never gives up, which is why people will want to follow her. The next day, Rose's battalion struggles through the difficult terrain until they notice signs of battle between demons and wolves. Suddenly, they hear roaring and find a group of demons capturing the wolves they defeated. When the demons' leader notices them, Rose's battalion shows themselves. Rose steps forward to ask the demons what they're doing. The demons' leader just tells her they can't let them live because they've seen them. Rose calmly tells all to take command over the battalion while she's fighting the demon's leader. A moment later, Rose and the leader clash. They fight fiercely and Rose can't get a hit in because the demon is using wind magic to shield himself. Changing her tactics, Rose starts cutting down massive trees and throwing them at the demon until one of them hits him head on. However, he easily destroys the tree with his magic, seemingly unfazed. Impressed, the demon tells Rose that he has never met a human as strong as she is. Their battle continues and the demon traps Rose in a whirlwind of wind magic. To his surprise, she breaks out while healing herself and continues the fight. The demon introduces himself as Nero Argents and summons a demonic sword before clashing with Rose once more. Rose notices that the sword is cursed, so she can't let it touch her. Skillfully dodging Nero's attacks, she manages to hit him twice, making him crash to the ground. Nero acknowledges both Rose and her battalion, who have already managed to defeat all of his demon soldiers. He always thought that humans no longer have any real heroes left, but now he realizes that they're a threat to demonkind after all. He reveals that his final goal is awakening their lord and ending this era in which demons are trembling before humans. Powering up, Nero and his soldiers suddenly get their strength back. None of the demons care about dying, so they recklessly start attacking Rose's soldiers again. When they kill one of the knights, the rest of them start panicking. From then on, more of them are brutally killed. Furious and desperate, Rose charges at Nero wildly. Using her carelessness to his advantage, the powerful demon slashes at her eye. Shockingly, Rose realizes she can't heal her injury because Nero's demon sword has cursed her wound. As the few remaining knights are falling, Rose desperately tries to adjust to the battle, but it's too late. Nero is already charging at her. However, at the last moment, all stands in Nero's way and he slashes her instead of Rose. Looking at her fallen knights, Rose realizes she has failed the ones who have trusted her completely. She has been confident of her strength, but now she realizes she is actually weak. Just as Nero prepares to finish Rose off, she suddenly gets a burst of strength and grabs his blade. In her rage, she takes away Nero's sword and brutally beats him up. In the end, she smashes him against a tree and pierces him with his own sword. Rose wants nothing more than to finish Nero off, but she loses her strength. Seeing her defeated master, a miller rushes to his aid. Rose is surprised that Nero has someone who wants to save him even though he uses his subordinates like mere pawns. Looking at Amilla, Rose sees all in her and freezes on the spot, unable to stop her from taking her master to safety. All then calls out to Rose. She's dying, but Rose can't help her since she has been cut with the cursed demon sword. However, All says she has no regrets and she's happy to have fought as one of Rose's subordinates, just like the rest of the battalion. As all dies, Rose looks at the soldiers who trusted her and cries out in anguish. When she returns to the royal palace, Rose reports that the demon lord will most likely resurrect in the near future and invade the kingdom of Linger. Full of regrets, Rose asks the king to revoke her knighthood and her position as a battalion commander. In town, Rose comes across the parents of one of her deceased subordinates called Josh. She expects them to curse her, but they actually thank her for bringing back their son's body. Josh used to be a delinquent, but he seemed a lot happier when he became Rose's soldier. A month later, Rose is visited by Siglis. She hadn't left the battalion headquarters in a month, so he came to check up on her. Rose knows that he actually came because he was afraid she followed her subordinates to their graves and tells him that she wouldn't mind if she died. Getting angry, Siglis grabs her by her collar, but she tells him it was just a passing thought. It turns out that the curse from Nero's sword wore off with time, but Rose refuses to heal her eye. For her, it's a reminder of her sin and punishment for letting her battalion die. She doesn't want to die since all saved her life, but she doesn't know what she should live for either. At first, she thinks about revenge against the demons, but she realizes that's not right. She knows that, if all was in her place, she would accept her fate and move forward instead of thinking too deeply about things. Rose wants to remain the person all in her battalion loved and respected, so she decides to move on and look straight ahead. She decides she will never show weakness again, since there's a massive war coming up. Rose creates a force that saves lives called the Rescue Team. She decides that she'll need someone as strong as she is, someone who will be by her side and won't die. Back in the present, Rose tells Ken that he's an important and precious existence. He's the only person who is as strong and capable as she is. At the same time, Amila and the demon army complete the bridge they need to invade the kingdom of Linger. The Black Knight isn't afraid of the rescue team, but Amila assures him that they're a force to be reckoned with. Some time later, the forces of the kingdom of Linger set up a large camp. At the crack of dawn, while everyone's still sleeping, Ken wakes up. Suzuna joins him and shows off her new armor, hyped about displaying her skills in battle. While they're goofing off, Kazuki hears them and drags Suzuna off to Sigley's side. It's estimated that the Demon Lord's army is going to reach the grasslands in half an hour, so the knights intend to launch a preemptive magic attack as soon as they appear. Then, Suzuna and Kazuki are going to engage the enemy together with the other knights. Their ultimate goal will be to take the commander's head. Not long later, Suzuna and Kazuki notice the Demon Lord's army on the horizon. The mages start shooting offensive spells at their enemies, but once the dust settles, the demon horde is gone. To everyone's shock, the demons are coming from a completely different direction and the army does their best to adjust. Meanwhile, Rose orders the rescue team's grunts to join the battle and start looking for the injured. Orga and Yuru are going to stay on duty in the medical tents, where Rose and Ken are also going to stay until the combat starts escalating. Just a few moments later, Tong brings a couple of injured soldiers to heal. Ken is shocked by the brutality of war, but he does his job to the best of his abilities. On the battlefield, the huge snake Belgianak proves to be a huge problem, throwing knights around left and right. Close by, the Black Knight watches the battle, apparently bored by how weak the humans are. Suddenly, a knight charges at him and stabs him, but the Black Knight doesn't seem to care. He cuts down the knight who attacked him and pulls the sword out of his own back. We can see that the sword is stained by black blood. When the injured knight tries crawling away, the Black Knight prepares to finish him off, but he's distracted by a rescue team member who saves the wounded man. Running back to the humans' encampment, the rescue team member brings the injured knight to the medical tent. Seeing that the humans aren't doing so well, Rose and Ken run toward the battlefield. Rose heard that the enemy has a Black Knight on their side who uses strange magic. Then, Ken remembers he had seen the Black Knight kill his friends in the vision the fox-eared girl showed him. Noticing that Ken is worried about something, Rose asks him if he's still determined he won't kill anyone. When he confirms, Rose calls him an idiot, but decides to teach him a special move he can use if he has to take an enemy down. Then, the two split up. Running through the dangerous battlefield, Ken keeps dodging the demon's attacks and picking up injured soldiers. Impressively, he heals them while he's running. Rose does the same, but she's much more reckless and violent. Somewhere else, Suzuna effectively fights the demons using her thunder magic. When Kazuki joins her, they advance toward the enemy commander. At that moment, the Black Knight arrives together with a unit of demons. Suzuna and Kazuki recognize the Black Knight as being stronger than the other enemies, but a number of knights charges toward him carelessly. They all stab him at the same time, but the Black Knight morphs his armor into spikes and kills them. Kazuki then fires a burst of light magic at the Black Knight and manages to damage him, but he quickly heals himself. When Kazuki gets damaged somehow, Suzuna realizes that their enemy's magic can reflect others' attacks. It turns out that the Black Knight's armor reflects all damage back to whoever attacked him. At that moment, Ken gets an intense headache and another vision of Suzuna and Kazuki dead. While he's distracted, a demon attacks him, but someone saves him. It turns out it's the same soldier Ken saved before, and he asks him where Suzuna and Kazuki are. While Ken's running toward them, Suzuna and Kazuki come up with a plan to defeat the Black Knight. They both charge at their enemy, with Suzuna raising a dust cloud to blind him. Both of them slash at the Black Knight without him seeing them, but their attacks come back to hurt them anyway. Suzuna thought that he can't reflect the attacks he can't see, but that doesn't seem to be the case. However, she notices that the damage to the Black Knight's back isn't reflected. Getting another idea, Suzuna tells Kazuki to distract the Black Knight. Using his light magic, Kazuki blinds the Black Knight, and at that moment Suzuna uses magic to reach him extremely quickly and stab him from behind. She realized that the Black Knight can't reflect attacks he can't sense coming. However, it turns out the Black Knight just wanted her to think that. He reflects the fatal damage back to Suzuna and also fatally stabs Kazuki. The Black Knight reveals that the damage reflection happens automatically, but he can control it. In actuality, there is no one who can damage him. Both Suzuna and Kazuki fall to the ground. Suzuna remembers the time she was summoned to this strange world with Ken and Kazuki. All she could think about back then was starting her life over as a new person, but Ken knew exactly what he needed to do in order to live in their new home. Until now, she believed that everything was going to be alright as long as she was together with Ken and Kazuki, but now she's lying on the ground about to be killed. Suddenly, Ken appears running at an inhuman speed, his fist shining with intense green mana. He punches the Black Knight as hard as he can, smashing him to the ground. Reaching Suzuna in time, Ken quickly heals her. Furious, the Black Knight gets back on his feet, screaming about how much Ken's punch hurt him. we can see that he's actually a white-haired girl underneath his armor. Raving mad, the Black Knight runs toward Ken, who decides to grab his friends and get away as quickly as possible. The Black Knight hurls her sword at Ken, but he manages to dodge it. Then, Suzuna tells Ken about the secret of the Black Knight's armor and how he's the only one who managed to damage him. Ken doesn't want to fight, but he realizes he can't help the injured knights with the Black Knight in his way. Running at his enemy with determination, Ken somehow punches her attacks away without them being reflected back. The magic armor seems to melt away as soon as Ken's healing magic touches it. Charging up healing magic in his fist, Ken punches the Black Knight, knocking her into the distance. Suzuna realizes that the armor's reflection magic doesn't work because the damage inflicted on Ken is immediately healed. Ken's healing punch also heals the damage he would inflict on the Black Knight, so the punches actually just really hurt. Suzuna laughs, thinking that's definitely the wrong way to use healing magic. Growing angrier than ever, the Black Knight powers up her sword, making it grow huge. However, Ken isn't afraid and charges at her once again. Ken's fist and the knight's sword clash, with the sword melting in the end. As Ken's fist strikes the Black Knight, her armor completely dissolves and she gets knocked out. Ken has finally perfected the technique most suitable for him, the ultimate healing punch. After the battle, the knights take a break and Ken heals the ones who are seriously injured. Kazuki and Suzuna then go after the snake monster Baljanak. Ken wants to join them, but Rose appears and stops him. She's mad at him because he almost let his friends die. However, she's impressed when she sees that he managed to defeat the Black Knight all on his own. Since the battlefield is under control now that the Black Knight is out of commission, Rose tells Ken they'll go back to the base. Before he leaves, Ken wishes Suzuna and Kazuki luck. At the Demon Army's base, Amila is shocked when she hears that the Black Knight was single-handedly defeated by a new member of the rescue team. Terrified, she calls the invasion of Linger off. However, before she can order her troops to retreat, Kazuki and Suzuna attack Baljanak. A few minutes later, Ken sees a huge explosion from the headquarters and realizes that Baljanak is defeated. Rose announces to everyone that the demons are retreating. She tells Ken that him saving Suzuna and Kazuki from death was what decided the battle. Remembering everything that happened since he came to this world, Ken sheds a few tears. He admits that he was terrified, but he's glad that he was able to meet Rose and save so many people's lives. Having depleted his mana and stamina, Ken faints, but Rose is there to catch him. When Ken and his friends return to the capital, they're greeted and praised by all the townspeople. Some time later, Gamal, a guy from the rescue team, tells Ken that he's needed in the royal palace. When he arrives in the castle town, Ken is showered with praise and gifts, having become famous after the war. In the royal palace, Siglis and the king ask Ken to help them with interrogating the Black Knight. Apparently, the Black Knight doesn't hold much loyalty to the Demon Lord, so she already revealed a lot of information about the demons. However, she won't talk anymore if they don't bring Ken to her, which is why Siglis needs him. Descending the steps to the dungeon, Ken and Siglis are joined by Suzuna. Siglis tells Ken that he was able to defeat the Black Knight because she has an affinity for dark magic, which is cancelled out by healing magic. Realizing that would mean that none of the damage he did to the Black Knight was actually healed, Ken gets worried about her. Reaching the Black Knight's cell, Ken sees that she has equipped her magical armor again. Feeling sorry for the Black Knight, Ken enters her cell and takes her hand. He uses his healing magic on her, making her armor melt away. Concentrating, he manages to heal her properly this time, removing her armor completely. The Black Knight reveals that she has never felt such warmth and asks Ken to stay with her for a while. Some time later, Rose calls Ken for some special one-on-one training. She tells him she's going to punch him as fast and hard as she can and he's supposed to dodge it. Ken is terrified, but Rose explains that he should learn to avoid attacks instead of just taking them and healing himself. Healing magic doesn't work on wounds caused by a cursed weapon, after all. Ken understands the purpose of the training, but he still doesn't enjoy getting beaten up. From time to time, Ken would visit the Black Knight, ask her how she's doing and complain to her about Rose. Ever since the time he healed her, the Black Knight started acting shy around him. After that, Ken visits Kazuki too, who's hard at work training his magic skills while Celia watches. In the dungeon, the Black Knight is visited by Rose, who came as the king's messenger. The Black Knight is given a choice. She can either spend the rest of her life in prison or she can become Rose's apprentice. Ominously entering the Black Knight's prison cell, Rose puts a mana-sealing magic choker around her neck. Apparently, Rose already made the choice to take her under her wing since it's troublesome to keep guarding her prison cell. Then, Rose brings the Black Knight to Ken and announces that she's going to reform her into an errand girl for the rescue team. That night, Rose calls Ken to her office. It turns out that the king wants to form alliances with other countries to stand against the demons. He wants to appoint Kazuki, Suzuna, and Ken as his messengers. The next day, Ken comes across Suzuna in town. Suddenly, he notices the fox-eared girl who showed him the future and he grabs her. Seemingly unfazed by his sudden appearance, the girl tells him it's time for him to repay her favor. She wants him to save her mother and tells him he's the only one who can do it. The girl introduces herself as Amako and tells him she needs to talk to him in private. Meanwhile, the Black Knight is having a hard time with Rose's training. While everyone else is out, Ken takes Amako and Suzuna to the rescue team's headquarters. Amako explains that she's an oracle of time and she had to show him the vision of the future so he could save the kingdom. She also turned specifically to him because she was looking for a healer who could also fight. She came all the way from Beastkin Country to look for someone who can go back with her to Beastkin Country and help her mother. Ken feels sorry for her and then realizes that he could stop by Beastkin territory while he's acting as a messenger for the king. When he asks Rose about it, she gets serious. Oracles of time are responsible for predicting calamities exclusively for the Beastkin. If the Beastkin found out that one of them is in the kingdom of Linger, it could lead to war between the two countries. However, that's the exact reason why Ken should escort Amako back to Beastkin Country as soon as possible. That night, the Black Knight eats dinner together with the rescue team. She hates her training, doesn't fit in at all, and doesn't like anyone in the team other than Ken. When Ken gives her a journal to write down her training progress, she gets the motivation to train harder. The Black Knight keeps training with the rescue squad for the next several days, getting better at running every day. One day, she hears a loud sound from the forest and decides to check it out. To her shock, she sees Rose punching Ken as hard as she can. Seeing Ken taking the incredible punches and even dodging one of them, she starts thinking that he isn't human. Noticing her, Rose tells her that she'll be training under Ken's orders from then on. During a break, Ken asks the Black Knight for her name. Getting embarrassed, she tells him her name is Felm. Suddenly, Blurrin appears and Ken runs off playing with him. Felm gets mad that the revelation of her name didn't cause much of a reaction at all. That night after dinner, Felm overhears Rose telling Ken that his mission as the king's messenger is going to start tomorrow. The next morning, Felm sneaks outside and runs towards the castle town. At the same time, Ken brings Amako to the king. The atmosphere is tense, but the king ends up thanking the fox girl for saving the kingdom. As a reward, he has planned Ken's route in a way that he'll be able to go with Amako to Beastkin territory at the end of his journey. Welsi the nun then explains his mission. Ken is going to visit 4 different cities: the city of Magic Luckfist, the nation of Prayer Samarairo, the nation of Water Mileark, and finally the Beastkin territory. Welsi, Suzue, and Kazuki are going to accompany him to Luckfist, but after that he'll have to visit the other places without them, joined by a couple of knights. Ken invites Eriku to join him and he's happy to accompany his friend. As his second escort, he chooses Blurrin. Somewhere in the forest, Rose finds Felm and catches her, thinking she's trying to escape. However, it turns out that she's just worried about Ken and wants to go with him. At sunset, Ken meets up with Felm, but she won't admit she's worried about him and she runs away. Rose then talks to Ken, telling him that she expects great things from him. After she leaves, Ken is touched by how much she trusts him and admits to himself that he really admires her. The next morning, Orga and Yuru send Ken and Amako off before he joins Kazuki and Suzuna at the castle. Together with his friends, Ken departs from the kingdom of Linger. Unbeknownst to him, Rose and Felm are following him.